The New Mexico Territory, fall of 1881, was a land where silence carried more weight than words. Wind moved low across the hard pan earth, stirring dust along fence lines and through patches of dry mesquite. The morning air was crisp enough to burn the lungs, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that would likely never reach the parched ground. Maxwell Sullivan stood motionless on the ridge, rifle steady in weathered hands as he tracked the movement of a deer in the valley below. At 52, he still had the eyes of a younger man, though the rest of him had surrendered to time. His beard and hair had gone more salt than pepper, and deep lines etched his face like dry creek beds. He wore the same faded canvas coat he had had for years, patched at the elbows and stained with memories of 100 hunts. He drew a slow breath, finger easing toward the trigger. The deer paused, ears twitching, and Maxwell held still as stone. One shot. One clean kill. That was the way he'd always done it. The distant sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. The deer's head snapped up, and in an instant, it bounded away into the brush. Maxwell lowered his rifle, a frown deepening the lines around his mouth. Riders coming hard from the east. No one ever came to his land unless they were lost or carrying trouble. He shifted position, crouching low against the ridgeline as he tracked the sound. Through a gap in the rocks, he spotted them. 3 riders pushing their horses too hard for the terrain, dust rising behind them like smoke signals. They were chasing something, or someone. Maxwell's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of a 4th figure, on foot and running with desperate speed toward the creek that marked his property line. A woman, her dark hair flying behind her deerskin dress torn and dirty. Apache. And the men behind her, bounty hunters, by the look of their mismatched gear and hard faces. The woman reached the creek bank and hesitated, clearly weighing her chances against the rushing water. The decision was made for her when a bullet kicked on dirt at her feet. She plunged into the creek just as another shot rang out. Maxwell saw her stumble, clutching her upper arm where the bullet had found its mark. The current immediately began to drag her downstream, her strength already compromised by the wound and what appeared to be exhaustion. He had a choice to make, and only seconds to make it. With a muttered curse, Maxwell fired a warning shot over the bounty hunters' heads. "That's far enough," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of command. The 3 men wheeled their horses around, weapons raised until they saw Maxwell's determined approach. The leader, a scrawny, rat-faced man with a filthy beard, lowered his rifle slightly. "This ain't your business, mister," he called. "We're authorized to collect on hostiles." "Not on my land, you're not," Maxwell replied, keeping his Colt aimed squarely at the man's chest. "And that creek marks my boundary." "She's Apache," the second man spat. "Probably one of them that killed your kin. You're that Sullivan fella, ain't you?" Maxwell didn't answer, his eyes flicking momentarily to the creek where the woman was struggling against the current, growing weaker by the second. $500 for her, the leader offered suddenly. "Dead or alive, don't matter to us which. Army pays good for Apache scalps these days." "Get off my land," Maxwell said coldly. "Now." Something in his voice or the steady aim of his Colt convinced them. With muttered threats and dark looks, the bounty hunters turned their horses and rode back the way they had come. Maxwell holstered his weapon and dismounted quickly, scanning the creek. The woman had managed to grab onto a half-submerged log, but was clearly losing her grip. Without hesitation, he waded into the frigid water, fighting against the current until he reached her. Her eyes, dark and fierce despite her weakened state, met his as he grabbed her around the waist. There was no gratitude in that gaze, only defiance and something else he couldn't name. The return to shore was a battle against the surging creek, made more difficult by the woman's initial resistance. By the time Maxwell dragged them both onto the muddy bank, his lungs burned and his arms trembled with exertion. The woman lay motionless, water streaming from her clothes and hair. The bullet had torn through the flesh of her upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow that still seeped despite the cold water. Worse, she wasn't breathing. Maxwell acted on instinct, turning her onto her side and pressing firmly on her back until water gushed from her mouth and nose. After several tense moments, she convulsed with a gasp, coughing violently as air returned to her lungs. He sat back on his heels, relief washing over him. The woman's eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with startling intensity. She spoke in Apache, her voice barely audible. Maxwell shook his head. Can't understand you, he said simply. But we need to get you somewhere warm. That arm needs tending. Whether she understood his words or not, the woman made no further protest as Maxwell lifted her. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, all bone and sinew beneath the sodden dress. He carried her to his horse, noting the bruises on her face and neck that told of troubles before the bounty hunters had found her. The ride to his cabin was slow, Maxwell keeping one arm around the woman's waist to steady her as she swayed with exhaustion. The sun had climbed high by the time the small homestead came into view, a weathered log cabin with a stone chimney, a lean-to stable for the horse, and a crude corral beyond. It wasn't much, but it had been Maxwell's world for 7 years. Inside, the cabin was spare but neat. A cast-iron stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves stocked with essentials, and a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt in the opposite corner. Maxwell had built it all himself, shaping the solitude to fit his needs like a second skin. He eased the woman onto a chair, then stoked the fire in the stove and set a pot of water to heat. She watched his movements through half-closed eyes, her body rigid despite her weakness. When Maxwell approached with a worn but clean towel, she tensed. Just going to see to that arm, he said, keeping his voice even. Then you can rest. The bullet had only grazed her, but the wound was deep enough to need cleaning. Maxwell worked methodically, washing away the dirt and blood with as much gentleness as his calloused hands could manage. The woman bore his ministrations in silence, though her breath hissed through clenched teeth when he applied a tincture of whiskey to the wound. As he wrapped a strip of clean cloth around her arm, Maxwell noticed a peculiar marking on her, a small tattoo or scar in the shape of a crescent moon. Something about it tugged at his memory, but he pushed the thought away. The past was a country he'd left behind long ago. You got a name? He asked, securing the bandage. Mine's Maxwell, Maxwell Sullivan. She regarded him for a long moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Finally, she spoke a single word. Nashota. Maxwell nodded. Nashota, you can stay until that arm heals. Then you'll have to move on. Too dangerous otherwise. He didn't know if she understood, but it hardly mattered. He had said what needed saying, established the boundaries that would keep them both safe. Or so he told himself. That night, Maxwell gave up his bed to Nashota and made himself a pallet on the floor near the stove. Sleep was slow in coming. The day's events had stirred something in him, disturbing the carefully maintained stillness of his existence like a stone dropped into a deep well. In the darkness, Maxwell found himself listening to the sound of another person breathing under his roof, a sound he had not heard in many years. It was both a comfort and a disquiet, a reminder of all he had left behind when he chose this life of isolation. When sleep finally claimed him, it brought no peace. The dreams came as they always did when his defenses were low. Gunfire, screams, the smell of burning thatch and flesh, women and children running. His voice hoarse from shouting, trying to stop what cannot be stopped. A village in flames, the glint of a silver badge on a blue uniform, the face of Major Caldwell, twisted in a smile that never reached his eyes. No witnesses, Sullivan. That's an order. And then the worst of it, the child, no more than 6 or 7, clutching a handmade doll as she hid beneath an overturned basket, her eyes finding his. The sudden silence as the shooting stopped. Heavy footsteps approaching. His desperate attempt to create a distraction, to lead Caldwell away. The blow to his head that sent him spiraling into darkness. And when he woke, Maxwell jerked awake, gasping for breath, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the chill in the cabin. He sat up, disoriented, heart pounding in his chest like a trapped animal. A soft movement drew his attention. Nashota was awake, watching him from the bed, her dark eyes reflecting the last embers of the fire. How much had she seen? How much had he revealed in the grip of the nightmare? Bad dreams, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Nothing more. Nashota said nothing, but her gaze didn't waver. There was something in the way she looked at him, not just caution or gratitude, but a deeper assessment, as if she were trying to reconcile the man before her with some other image in her mind. Maxwell rose stiffly, added wood to the stove, and busied himself making coffee. The familiar routine helped ground him, pushing the nightmare back into the shadows where he kept all his memories of that time. But as the dawn light began to filter through the cabin's small windows, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The carefully constructed walls of his isolation had been breached, not just by Nashoda's physical presence, but by something else, something he couldn't yet name. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Maxwell went about his chores, chopping wood, tending to his small herd of cattle, repairing fences, while Nashoda recovered her strength. Though still weak, she refused to remain idle. He would return to the cabin to find she had swept the floor, or organized his meager supplies, or prepared a simple meal from whatever provisions were available. They spoke little. Maxwell had never been one for idle talk, and Nashoda seemed to understand this, or perhaps share the sentiment. When they did speak, it was in short, functional exchanges. Wood needs stacking. I can do. Arm healing? Better now. On the fourth day, Maxwell found Nashoda standing outside the cabin, staring at the distant mountains where the Apache traditionally made their camps during the fall hunting season. "Your people out there?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Nashoda shook her head. "No people now. Husband, brothers, all gone." She spoke in halting English, but her meaning was clear enough. Soldiers came, then others. Maxwell nodded, understanding more than she had said. The soldiers would have been Caldwell's men, or others like them. The others would have been the bounty hunters, picking over the remains like coyotes after wolves had taken down a deer. "You were alone out there, before those men found you?" 2 days, no water. She didn't look at him as she spoke, her eyes still fixed on the mountains. "Before that, I hid with others. Soldiers found us. My husband fought. He died. I ran." The simple brutality of her story hit Maxwell like a physical blow. How many times had this same tragedy played out across the territory? How many families torn apart, lives destroyed in the name of progress and security? "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Nashoda finally turned to look at him, her face unreadable. "Why you help me?" It was a question Maxwell had asked himself more than once since that day at the creek. Why risk his carefully maintained isolation for a stranger? Why intervene in a world he'd chosen to abandon? "Seemed the right thing," he answered finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he was ready to give. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the small table, sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Maxwell found himself studying Nashoda with new eyes. The bruises on her face were fading, and with proper food and rest, she had begun to regain her strength. There was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, a resilience that spoke of a lifetime of enduring hardship without surrendering to it. "Why you live alone?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Maxwell paused, the question catching him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked him anything about himself. "Simpler that way," he replied. "No one to worry about, no one to lose." Nashoda regarded him steadily. "You lost someone." It wasn't a question, but Maxwell found himself answering anyway. "Wife and son, long time ago. Fever took them on the trail." When the lie came easily, practiced over years until it almost felt like truth. Better than the real story. Better than admitting he hadn't been there when they needed him most. But as he spoke, something flickered in Nashoda's eyes, a shadow of recognition or doubt. She said nothing more, but Maxwell had the unsettling feeling that she had seen through his carefully constructed narrative. That night, the nightmare returned with greater intensity. The village in flames. Caldwell's cold smile. No witnesses. The child hiding. And then, a new detail, one his conscious mind had suppressed. A woman running toward him, clutching something in her hand. A flash of silver, a pendant or amulet of some kind. Her voice, urgent but indistinct, and on her wrist, a crescent moon mark, just like... Maxwell woke with a gasp, the realization hitting him like a bucket of ice water. The mark on Nashoda's wrist. He had seen it before in that burning village 12 years ago. He sat up, his heart pounding. Across the cabin, Nashoda slept soundly, her breathing deep and even. Was it possible? Could she have been there? One of the few who escaped the massacre? Or was his mind playing tricks, weaving fragments of memory and guilt into false connections? Either way, the coincidence was too strong to ignore. If Nashoda had been at Yellow Creek that day, if she had witnessed what happened, then she might know things Maxwell had spent years trying to forget. things that could unravel the fragile peace he had built in this isolated corner of the territory. Morning found Maxwell outside, splitting logs with methodical force, each swing of the axe a physical outlet for the tension coiling inside him. He had always found clarity in labor, in the simple, demanding tasks that left no room for the complications of thought. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't hear Nashota approach until she spoke. "You need help." Maxwell turned, wiping sweat from his brow. Nashota stood a few feet away, her injured arm held close to her body but her stance determined. "Your arm's not healed enough," he said. "Ida can stack," she insisted, gesturing to the pile of split logs. "Not useless." There was something in her tone, pride perhaps, or a refusal to be seen as helpless, that Maxwell recognized. He had felt it himself in those dark days after he had lost everything. The desperate need to prove, if only to oneself, that life could still go on. "All right," he conceded, "but easy. Don't push it." They worked in silence for a time, Maxwell splitting the logs and Nashada stacking them against the side of the cabin. The rhythm of their shared labor had a kind of peace to it, a simplicity that belied the questions hanging between them. "Your arm," Maxwell said finally, nodding toward the crescent mark visible on her wrist as she worked. "That mark, what does it mean?" Nashoda's hand stilled momentarily. "It is family sign, from grandmother." Maxwell nodded, not pressing further. If she was from Yellow Creek, if she had been there that day, she gave no indication of recognizing him. Perhaps she hadn't seen his face clearly. Perhaps he had changed too much in the 12 years. Or perhaps the mark was simply a coincidence, and his guilty conscience was making connections where none existed. As the days passed, Nashoda's strength returned more fully. She began to take on more tasks around the homestead, insisting on contributing to the work that kept them fed and sheltered. Maxwell found himself growing accustomed to her presence, to the quiet efficiency with which she moved through the cabin, to the way she seemed to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. One evening, as they sat by the stove after the day's work was done, Maxwell realized their supplies were running low. "Need to make a trip to town soon," he said more to himself than to Nashoda. "Flour's nearly gone. Coffee, too." "I go with you?" Nashoda asked, looking up from the shirt she was mending, one of his old ones that she had claimed for herself. Maxwell shook his head. "Too risky. Royal Wells isn't friendly to your kind. 30 miles there and back. I'll go alone, be back by nightfall tomorrow." He saw the flash of concern in her eyes, quickly masked. "Those men might come back." "They won't. Not worth the trouble for them." He wasn't sure if he believed it himself, but he said it with conviction. "Besides, you know how to use this now." He nodded toward the rifle he had shown her how to handle the day before, a precaution he had insisted on despite her initial reluctance. Nashoda nodded, though doubt lingered in her expression. "When you go?" "First light. Sooner I leave, sooner I'll be back." That night, as Maxwell prepared for his journey, gathering the few items he might trade in town and counting out the meager coins he kept hidden in a tin beneath the floorboards, he found himself unusually anxious about leaving. It had been years since he'd had anyone or anything to come back to. The feeling was foreign, almost forgotten, a mixture of responsibility and connection that both weighed on him and anchored him. He slept poorly, his dreams a jumbled mess of past and present. The burning village, the child hiding. Mary's face as fever took her, Tom's small body wrapped in a blanket, Nashoda standing at the creek with bullets kicking up dirt around her feet. He woke before dawn, unsettled and on edge. Nashoda was already up, moving quietly around the cabin, heating coffee and wrapping cornbread in a cloth for his journey. She handed him the bundle without comment, her eyes meeting his briefly in the dim light. "I'll be back by sundown," Maxwell said, securing his saddlebags. "Bar the door. Keep the rifle close." She nodded once, her expression solemn. "I will wait." Something in the way she said it, a simple statement of fact, not a promise or a plea, struck Maxwell deeply. How long had it been since anyone had waited for him? Since his presence or absence had mattered to another living soul? The ride to Royal Wells was long and dusty, the landscape opening up around Maxwell like a book he had read too many times but could never quite put down. The town itself was little more than a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of civilization. A general store, a saloon, a small church, a few houses, and a sheriff's office that doubled as a jail. Maxwell tied his horse outside the general store, brushing trail dust from his coat before stepping inside. The cool dimness after the bright sunlight momentarily blinded him, and he stood still, letting his eyes adjust. "Well, look what the wind blew in," a familiar voice called from the back of the store. "Maxwell Sullivan, as I live and breathe. Thought you might have died out there in the wilderness." Maxwell's vision cleared to reveal Harrison Walsh moving toward him from behind the counter. Walsh was a barrel-chested man with a shock of red hair gone mostly gray and a face that had seen its share of weather and worry. They had served together in the Army before Yellow Creek, before everything went wrong. "Still breathing," Maxwell replied, accepting the firm handshake Walsh offered. "Just need supplies." "You and half the territory," Walsh said with a laugh. "War Department's been buying up everything they can get their hands on. Something big brewing with the Apache from what I hear." Maxwell's interest sharpened. "What kind of something?" Walsh lowered his voice, leaning in conspiratorially despite the empty store. "Word is there's been raids on outlying homesteads. Brutal business. 3 families wiped out in the last month alone." "Apache?" Maxwell asked, keeping his tone neutral. "That's the official story. Army's got patrols out all over, hunting down hostiles." Walsh's expression suggested he had his own thoughts on the matter. "Between you and me, something doesn't add up. Apache usually hit, grab what they need, and fade back into the hills. These attacks, they're different. Bodies left on display, women taken, children." He shook his head. "It stirred up a hornet's nest, that's for certain. Every trigger-happy fool with a gun is out hunting bounty." Maxwell thought of the men who had been chasing Nashota. "Who's leading the Army response?" Walsh's expression darkened. "That's the real news. Caldwell's back. Got himself a promotion to colonel since you saw him last, running operations out of Fort Davis." The name hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Caldwell, the architect of the Yellow Creek Massacre. The man whose cold smile had haunted his dreams for 12 years. "Didn't know you kept up with Army gossip," Maxwell said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Walsh gave him a long look. "It's more than gossip, Max. I've been watching Caldwell for months. Something about these raids didn't sit right with me from the beginning." His voice dropped lower. "Got a few trusted men keeping tabs on Army movements. Been building a case, quiet-like." He tapped the badge pinned to his vest, something Maxwell had missed in his initial greeting. "I'm not just sheriff of Royal Wells anymore. Got appointed territorial marshal last month. The governor's concerned about what's happening with the Apache situation." Maxwell stared at him, surprised. "Marshal? That's quite a step up." "It gives me authority beyond the town limits," Walsh said meaningfully. "Authority to investigate even military operations if I suspect civilian laws being broken." "Suits you," Maxwell said, genuinely surprised. Walsh had always been the most level-headed of their company, but he had never expressed interest in law enforcement. "It has its moments," Walsh agreed. "Now, what can I get you? Still living on coffee and cornmeal out there?" Maxwell gave him the list, and Walsh moved around the store, gathering the items. As he worked, he continued to talk, filling Maxwell in on the changes in the territory since his last visit. New settlers pushing farther into Apache lands. Tensions rising as water and hunting grounds became contested. The railroad survey crews marking paths that would soon bring steel and steam to the farthest reaches of the wilderness. "World's changing, Max," Walsh said, as he wrapped the last of the supplies in the brown paper. "Can't hide from it forever, even out in your personal desert." Maxwell grunted noncommittally. "Not hiding, just living. Is that what you call it?" Walsh's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. 7 years in that cabin, barely speaking to another soul. Sounds like hiding to me." Maxwell didn't answer, busying himself with counting out coins for the supplies. He had no interest in justifying his choices, not even to an old friend. As he gathered his purchases, Walsh's hand fell on his arm. "Listen, Max, I don't know what happened to you after Yellow Creek. Don't know why you left the Army the way you did, or what drove you out to that godforsaken patch of desert. But if you ever need help, any kind of help, my door's open." Maxwell nodded, touched despite himself by the sincerity in Walsh's voice. "Appreciate that." As he turned to leave, Walsh called after him. "One more thing. Those bounty hunters I mentioned? They're not just any random glory seekers. They're organized, professional, and they answer directly to Caldwell. Maxwell paused, his back to Walsh. Why tell me this? Because they've been asking about you, specifically. Wanted to know if you had any visitors lately. A chill ran down Maxwell's spine. What did you tell them? That the Maxwell Sullivan I know doesn't take visitors? Walsh moved closer, lowering his voice. But I'm telling you now, as a friend, if you're mixed up in something, be careful. Caldwell's got the full backing of the War Department these days. He's untouchable. Maxwell met his friend's concerned gaze. I'll keep that in mind. The ride back to his homestead was tense, Maxwell pushing his horse harder than was wise in the afternoon heat. Walsh's warnings echoed in his mind, along with the revelation that Caldwell was not only back in the territory, but actively hunting Apache, and perhaps, specifically, hunting Nashotah. But why? What could one Apache woman possibly mean to a man like Caldwell? Unless she knew something. Unless she had been at Yellow Creek that day, had witnessed the massacre, had evidence that could expose what really happened. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. By the time Maxwell crested the final ridge that overlooked his property, he reined in his horse, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. Nothing seemed out of place. The cabin stood as he had left it, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin, straight line that suggested Nashotah had maintained the fire throughout the day. Yet something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with warning. Maxwell dismounted, leaving his horse ground-tied as he moved forward on foot, rifle ready. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, not how he had left it, nor how Nashotah would have kept it if she were being cautious. Maxwell approached silently, years of training taking over as he moved from cover to cover, alert for any sign of threat. A faint sound reached him. Movement inside the cabin. He pressed himself against the outer wall, listening intently. The creak of floorboards. A soft scraping as if something heavy was being dragged or moved. And beneath it all, a quiet, rhythmic sound that he couldn't immediately identify. Maxwell took a deep breath, then swung around the door frame in one smooth motion, rifle raised and ready. The scene that met his eyes was not at all what he had expected. Nashotah knelt in the center of the cabin, the floorboards beneath his bed pulled up to reveal the small space where he kept his most private possessions. The old wooden chest, the one containing all he had left of his former life, lay open beside her. And in her hands, held with a reverence that made his chest ache, was a small Apache handcrafted doll, the very one that had belonged to the child in his nightmares. She looked up at his entrance, her eyes wide but not fearful. Instead, they held a mixture of recognition, sadness, and something that might have been relief. "I know you," she said softly, in perfect, unaccented English. From the day the sky fell at Yellow Creek, Maxwell's grip on the rifle tightened, his knuckles going white. The floor seemed to shift beneath him, the past and present colliding with dizzying force. He had spent 12 years burying Yellow Creek, both the memories and the evidence, and now it all lay exposed on his cabin floor. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Nashotah didn't flinch. She remained kneeling on the floor, the child's doll cradled in her hands as if it were made of glass. "I've been searching for this for a long time," she said. Maxwell stepped into the cabin, closing the door behind him. "You speak English, perfect English." "Yes." Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "I learned at the mission school before returning to my people." "You've been lying to me." "As you have lied to me," she countered. "Your wife and son didn't die of fever on any trail. They died at Yellow Creek, at the hands of soldiers under Major Caldwell's command." The sound of that name on her lips sent a jolt through Maxwell. He lowered the rifle slowly, suddenly aware of how absurd it was to be pointing a weapon at her. What would he do? Shoot her for uncovering the truth he had hidden even from himself? "How do you know about Yellow Creek?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I was there," Nashotah said simply. "I saw everything." Maxwell sank into a chair, the weight of the past pressing down on him like a physical burden. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves of the cabin with a hollow, mournful sound. The light was fading, casting long shadows across the rough, hewn floor. "That first day, when I pulled you from the creek," he said, "you recognized me." Nashoda nodded. Your beard is fuller now, your hair grayer. But your eyes, I would know them anywhere. You were the soldier who tried to stop it, the one who warned the children to hide. Maxwell closed his eyes, memories washing over him in a flood he could no longer contain. The Apache village at Yellow Creek had been peaceful, established with the blessing of local authorities who recognized the benefits of having friendlies settled rather than roaming. His wife Mary had been there as a teacher sent by a Quaker mission to educate the Apache children. Their son Tom had gone with her, fascinated by the opportunity to learn about a different way of life. Maxwell had been serving as a scout for the Army, mapping the territory under Caldwell's command. He hadn't known Caldwell's true intentions until it was too late, until they were already at the village, until the first shots had been fired. I tried to stop it, he said, opening his eyes to meet Nashoda's gaze. God help me, I tried. I know, she said softly. I saw you arguing with the one you called Major. I saw him strike you down, and I saw you later, searching among the bodies. The image came back to him with brutal clarity. The smoke-filled afternoon, the smell of death heavy in the air, his desperate search through the ruins for Mary and Tom. Finding Mary's body, riddled with bullets, but no sign of Tom, his certainty that the boy must have escaped somehow, must have run into the hills as Mary would have told him to do. I never found my son, Maxwell said, the words rough in his throat. I searched for weeks afterward, but there was no trace. He was only 6 years old. He couldn't have survived alone in that country. Nashoda's expression softened. He didn't. The simple statement struck Maxwell like a physical blow. You know what happened to him? He was taken, Nashoda said, along with several of our children, the soldiers who followed Caldwell's orders. They took them to Fort Adams. Alive? Hope flared briefly in Maxwell's chest, painful in its intensity. For a time, Nashoda's eyes held compassion but no false comfort. There was sickness at the fort that winter. Many did not survive, including your son. Maxwell absorbed the news in silence. He had suspected, of course, had known in his heart that Tom was gone, but hearing it confirmed after all these years reopened a wound he had thought long scarred over. How do you know this? He asked finally. Because I was taken too, Nashoda said. I was 15 then, old enough to work in the kitchens. I saw your son there. He spoke often of his father, the brave soldier who would come for him. Maxwell turned away, unable to bear the weight of her gaze. The thought of Tom waiting for him, believing until the end that his father would rescue him, was almost unbearable. Your wife, Nashoda continued, her voice gentle but insistent. She lived longer than the others. She worked in the infirmary, caring for the sick. Even when she fell ill herself, she continued to help. And she wrote. Wrote? Maxwell turned back, confusion momentarily overriding his grief. Letters, accounts of what happened at Yellow Creek, of what continued to happen at Fort Adams. She gave them to my grandmother for safekeeping. Nashoda held up the doll. She hid one inside this. It was meant for you. With careful movements, Nashoda turned the doll over, revealing a small seam in the back that had been expertly re-sewn. She worked it open with her fingernails and extracted a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. She held it out to Maxwell. His hand trembled as he took it. For a moment, he simply stared at the folded paper, afraid of what it might contain. Then slowly he unfolded it to reveal Mary's familiar handwriting, faded but still legible. My dearest Maxwell, if you are reading this, then the Apache woman Shima has kept her promise to find you. I do not know if I will live to see you again, but I must ensure that the truth of Yellow Creek is not lost. What Caldwell did was not a military action, but a massacre of innocents. The village harbored no hostiles, conducted no raids. The people there lived in peace, wanting only to be left to their ways. Caldwell knew this. The attack was ordered not to subdue enemies, but to clear valuable land for interests he represents. Mining concerns that believe gold lies beneath the creek bed. There is more. At Fort Adams, Caldwell continues his cruelties. The children taken from Yellow Creek are not being civilized as claimed, but worked like slaves. Many have died from neglect and abuse. Our Tom tries to be brave, but I fear for him daily. I have written more complete accounts and given them to Shima. She will hide them where Caldwell's men cannot find them. If there is justice in this world, these truths will one day come to light. I do not blame you for what happened. I know you tried to stop it. I know you would have saved us if you could. Please, my love, do not let guilt consume you. Instead, live to see justice done. With all my heart, Mary Maxwell read the letter twice, then carefully refolded it, his movements precise, controlled, belying the storm of emotion within him. When he finally looked up, his eyes burned with a cold fire that had long been absent. Shima was your grandmother, he asked. Nashoda nodded. She survived the massacre by hiding in the creek. After, she tracked the soldiers to Fort Adams. She posed as a laundress to gain access, to help those taken from our village. She was the one who cared for your wife in her final days. And the other accounts Mary mentioned? My grandmother kept them safe, passing them to me before she died. Nashoda hesitated. I came to your land not by accident, Maxwell Sullivan. I have been searching for you for many months. The bounty hunters? We're Caldwell's men. He has spies everywhere watching for Apache who might know the truth about Yellow Creek. When word spread of an Apache woman asking questions about a former Army scout, he sent them after me. Maxwell stood and moved to the window, staring out at the darkening land. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture he had spent years trying not to see. Caldwell's return to the territory, the mysterious Apache raids that didn't fit their usual patterns, the organized bounty hunters answering directly to Caldwell. He's doing it again, Maxwell said softly, creating a pretext for wiping out the Apache. These raids Walsh mentioned, they're not Apache at all. They're Caldwell's men, disguised, stirring up fear and hatred to justify a military response. Yes, Nashoda confirmed. My people have seen them, white men wearing Apache garb, speaking broken words they've learned, leaving bodies displayed in ways no Apache would. They paint their skin, wear wigs of black hair. From a distance, or to a frightened settler, they pass for Apache. Maxwell turned back to her. Why? What does Caldwell gain? The same thing he sought at Yellow Creek. Gold, or so he believes. There is an Apache sacred place in the mountains, a valley where our ancestors have gone for generations to pray. Caldwell is convinced it holds vast riches. And your grandmother's accounts, Mary's letters, they could expose him? They could, Nashoda agreed, if anyone would believe them. An Apache woman and a dead white teacher against a decorated Army officer? Who would take our word over his? She was right, of course. Caldwell had powerful backers, a sterling reputation among those who mattered. The word of an Apache, even with Mary's letters to support it, would carry little weight. So why come to me? Maxwell asked. What did you hope to gain? Nashoda rose to her feet, her movements graceful despite the lingering weakness in her injured arm. Justice, she said simply, for Yellow Creek, for my family, for your wife and son. I thought perhaps you, a white man, a former soldier with knowledge of Caldwell's crimes, might succeed where I could not. Maxwell laughed bitterly. I'm a hermit living on the edge of nowhere. I have no influence, no standing. I abandoned the army rather than face the truth of what happened. Who would listen to me now? The truth has power of its own, Nashoda said. It needs only the right voice to speak it. Before Maxwell could respond, a sound outside caught his attention. The distant rumble of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. He moved quickly to the window, scanning the darkness. In the faint moonlight, he could make out 3 riders cresting the ridge, moving with purpose toward the cabin. Get away from the windows, he ordered, grabbing his rifle and checking the load. Bounty hunters, same ones from the creek. Nashoda moved swiftly, gathering the doll and the scattered contents of the chest. They must have followed you from town, or they've been watching the cabin all along. Maxwell cursed himself for his carelessness. He had been so focused on Caldwell's return, on Walsh's warnings, that he had failed to consider the most obvious threat, that the bounty hunters might simply circle back to claim their prize. The riders were closer now, their approach deliberately unhurried, confident. Maxwell positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. There's a trap door under the rug, he said, not taking his eyes off the approaching men. Root cellar, small, but it'll hide you. Go. And leave you to face them alone? Nashoda's voice was firm. No, they hunt me, not you. I will not hide while another dies for me. This isn't a debate, Maxwell growled. I can handle them. 3 against 1? Those are poor odds, even for a former Army scout. She moved to the corner where he kept the shotgun, checking it with practiced hands. I can shoot as well as you. Better perhaps, as your eyes are not what they once were. Despite the tension of the moment, Maxwell felt a flicker of admiration for her courage. She stood straight, her face composed, no trace of the fear any reasonable person would feel. You don't have to do this, he said. Nor do you, she replied. Yet here we stand. The riders had reached the yard. A voice called out, harsh in the night air. Sullivan, we know you're in there. Send out the Apache woman and we'll leave you be. Maxwell didn't answer. He motioned for Nashota to position herself at the second window, away from the light of the stove. Don't fire unless they make a move, he instructed quietly. If it comes to shooting, aim for the horses first. They'll provide cover and confusion. She nodded, understanding the strategy. The bounty hunters would be expecting resistance from him, but not from her. The element of surprise might be enough to even the odds. Sullivan, the voice called again. Don't be a fool. $500 is good money, but it's not worth dying for, especially not for an Apache witch. Maxwell moved to the door, staying to the side out of any potential line of fire. You're trespassing, he called back. Ride on while you still can. A harsh laugh answered him. Trespassing? This is Army business, old man. That woman is wanted for questioning about the raids. You're harboring a hostile, which makes you one too in the eyes of the law. There is no law that says an Apache woman can be hunted like an animal, Maxwell replied. Now get off my land. A moment of silence followed, then the sound of hushed conversation among the riders. Maxwell tensed, sensing the coming violence as clearly as he could feel the change in air pressure before a storm. Last chance, Sullivan, the leader called. Send her out or we're coming in. Maxwell caught Nashota's eye across the cabin, saw her steady nod. They were ready. You want her, he called back. Come and get her. Get her. The response was immediate, a volley of gunfire directed at the cabin, bullets splintering through the wooden walls. Maxwell dropped to the floor, crawling to a better position as wood fragments showered down around him. He heard Nashota's shotgun blast, followed by the panicked whinnying of a horse and a man's curse. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. Maxwell fired methodically, aiming not to kill, but to discourage. He had no desire to add more deaths to his conscience, no matter how deserving these men might be. Nashota seemed to share his restraint, her shots directed high or at the ground near the horse's feet, creating confusion rather than casualties. When the shooting stopped, the night was filled with the sound of retreating hoofbeats and fading curses. The bounty hunters had decided that $500 wasn't worth the resistance they had encountered. Maxwell rose cautiously, moving to check that Nashota was unharmed. She stood by the window, shotgun still ready, her expression alert but composed. You all right? He asked. She nodded. They will be back, with more men. Probably, Maxwell agreed, but not tonight. They'll need to regroup, tend to their wounded pride. He gestured to the scattered contents of the chest, still lying on the floor. In the meantime, you should show me the rest of what you have. If we're going to stand against Caldwell, I need to know everything. Nashota regarded him for a long moment, as if weighing his commitment. Then she knelt and began to carefully extract items from the small, buckskin pouch she wore at her waist. Folded papers, a small journal, and a silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, the same symbol as the mark on her wrist. These are my grandmother's accounts, and those of your wife, she explained, laying them out with reverence. The journal belongs to a soldier who served under Caldwell, one who could not live with what he had done. He left it with a trader who was sympathetic to the Apache, who gave it to my grandmother. Maxwell picked up the pendant. And this? It belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before her. It marks our family as keepers of stories, rememberers of truth. She touched the mark on her wrist, the same symbol, carried in flesh and silver, so that even if one is taken, the other remains. Maxwell examined each item carefully, reading passages from Mary's accounts that brought both pain and a strange comfort. To hear her voice again, even in written words, was like finding water in the desert. The soldier's journal provided damning confirmation of Caldwell's crimes, detailing not just the Yellow Creek massacre, but other atrocities committed under his command. This is enough, Maxwell said finally. Enough to bring him down if we can get it to the right people. Who, Nashota asked. The army protects its own. The settlers fear and hate the Apache too much to listen. Maxwell thought of Walsh, his old friend, now sheriff of Royal Wells. I know someone who might help, someone with enough authority to be heard and enough integrity to speak the truth, no matter how unpopular. Can you trust this person? Nashota's skepticism was evident. With my life, Maxwell replied, and yours. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving a stillness that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The night was deep now, the stars sharp and clear in the vast desert sky. Maxwell moved to secure the door as best he could with the splintered wood, then began to gather the scattered documents. We should rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll ride for Whitey's. Walsh needs to see these. Nashota helped him restore the damaged chest, carefully replacing each item. As they worked side by side, Maxwell found himself studying her profile in the lamplight. The proud set of her jaw, the quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from her like heat from a banked fire. Why did you wait? He asked suddenly. You knew who I was from the beginning. Why not confront me immediately? She paused, considering. At first I was weak, in need of your help. Then as I recovered, I needed to know what kind of man you had become. Whether you were still the soldier who tried to stop the killing, or if time and guilt had hardened you beyond reach. And what did you conclude? Nashota met his gaze directly. That you are a man who has punished himself far more harshly than I ever could. That you have lived with ghosts for so long, you've forgotten how to live with the living. The simple truth of her assessment struck Maxwell with unexpected force. I dreamed of killing you once, Nashota continued, her voice soft but unflinching. After my grandmother died, when I set out to find you. But seeing you in this self-imposed exile, I understood that death would be a mercy, not punishment. Maxwell couldn't argue with her assessment. And now, what do you want from me now? The same thing your wife wanted in her letter. Justice, not vengeance. She touched the pendant, now hanging around her neck once more. My grandmother believed that truth is like water in the desert. Precious, life-giving, but easily lost if not properly tended. She gave her life to preserving the truth of Yellow Creek. I would give mine to see it finally told. Maxwell nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her commitment. Then we'll tell it. Together. That night they slept in shifts, one always awake and watching while the other rested. Maxwell took the first watch, sitting by the repaired door with his rifle across his knees. The cabin was quiet except for the soft sound of Nashota's breathing from the bed where she slept. He found his thoughts turning not to the past for once, but to the future. What would happen after they confronted Caldwell? If they succeeded in exposing him, would it change anything for the Apache? Would it bring any measure of peace to the ghost that haunted him? And what of Nashota? She had her own life, her own people. Once justice was served, she would have no reason to remain with a broken-down former scout living in self-imposed exile. The thought unsettled him. After years embracing isolation, the prospect of returning to that emptiness now felt like another kind of death. When it was time to switch, Maxwell gently touched Nashota's shoulder. She woke instantly, fully alert, a lifetime of survival instincts evident in her quick transition from sleep to wakefulness. Your turn, he said. I've checked outside. All quiet for now. Nashota nodded, rising and taking his place by the door while he settled onto the bed. The faint scent of sage and sweet grass lingered on the pillow where she had rested, a scent that tugged at his memory. Mary had smelled like that sometimes after spending days at the Apache village. Sleep came more easily than he expected, deep and for once, dreamless. Morning broke clear and cold, the desert air sharp with frost. Maxwell woke to find Nashota already up, brewing coffee and preparing a simple breakfast from their dwindling supplies. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of similar mornings, similar tasks. We should reach Royal Wells by midday if we ride double, Maxwell said as they ate. My horse can carry us both that far. Nashota nodded. And if the bounty hunters are watching the trails? We'll avoid the main roads. I know paths through the hills that few others would attempt. He paused, studying her face. Are you certain you want to do this? Walsh is a good man, but Royal Wells isn't friendly territory for Apache. I have lived among white people before, she reminded him. At the mission school and later at Fort Adams. I know how to move among them without drawing notice. Maxwell wasn't convinced. It's different now. With these raids, real or staged, sentiment against the Apache is running high. If you're recognized, then I will rely on you to speak for me, she said simply, as I have relied on you for shelter and healing. The trust implicit in her words stirred something in Maxwell. A sense of responsibility, yes, but also a deeper feeling he wasn't yet ready to examine. He nodded once, accepting both her trust and the obligation it carried. They set out shortly after, Maxwell leading his horse along a narrow game trail that wound through stands of pinon and juniper before climbing into rougher country. Nashota rode behind him, her arms light but secure around his waist, her body moving in rhythm with his as the horse picked its way through the rocky terrain. They spoke little, both aware of the need for caution, but the silence between them was comfortable now, no longer charged with suspicion or unspoken questions. Occasionally, Maxwell would point out some feature of the landscape, a hawk's nest high on a cliff face, the tracks of a mountain lion fresh in the sandy soil, a hidden spring known only to those who had spent years reading the secrets of the desert. By late morning, they had covered more than half the distance to Royal Wells. Maxwell called a halt in a sheltered ravine, allowing the horse to rest and drink from a small, spring-fed pool. As Nashota knelt to fill their canteen, Maxwell scanned the surrounding ridges, a habit of vigilance ingrained through years of scouting. Something caught his eye, a brief flash of light on the eastern ridge, as if sunlight had reflected off metal or glass. He stiffened, hand moving instinctively to his rifle. "What is it?" Nashota asked, alert to his sudden tension. "Not sure," Maxwell murmured, eyes still fixed on the ridge. "Could be nothing." "Could be." The distant crack of a rifle interrupted him. A bullet struck the rock beside the pool, sending stone fragments flying. Nashota dropped flat to the ground, while Maxwell pulled the horse down behind a boulder for cover. "Bounty hunters?" Nashota asked, her voice calm despite the danger. Maxwell shook his head. "Too skilled. That shot came from at least 500 yards. Bounty hunters aren't usually that good." He risked a quick glance around the boulder. Army, most likely. Cavalry scouts. Caldwell's men. Probably. Maxwell assessed their position with a scout's practiced eye. The ravine offered decent cover, but they were effectively trapped. The only exit was the way they had come in, which would expose them to fire from the ridge. "They must have been tracking us since dawn." Nashota's expression hardened. "Then Caldwell knows. About the documents. About what we plan to do." "Or he's just being thorough," Maxwell countered. "Either way, our options are limited. We can't go forward, and we can't go back." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Maxwell heard the distinctive sound of a bullet striking flesh, followed by their horse's pained whinny. The animal stumbled, blood streaming from a wound in its flank. "They're picking off our transportation," Maxwell simmered grimly, "making sure we can't run." "What do they want?" Nashota asked. "If they meant to kill us, they could have done so already." Maxwell considered. She was right. If the scouts had wanted them dead, they would be, which meant they had other orders. "They want us alive," he realized. "Or at least, they want you alive. Caldwell needs to know exactly what you have, who you've told." "The documents are safe for now, but we won't be for long." Maxwell checked his ammunition. 6 rounds in the rifle, 12 in his revolver. Not enough for an extended firefight against trained soldiers. "They'll wait until dark, then move in. We need to be gone before then." Nashota surveyed the ravine, her gaze calculating. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rock wall that Maxwell had overlooked. "It may lead through to the other side of the ridge." Maxwell assessed the opening skeptically. "It's tight. We might not fit." "I will fit," Nashota said with certainty, "and you are not as broad as you once were, old scout." Despite the gravity of their situation, Maxwell felt a surprising urge to smile at her dry humor. "Old, am I? Compared to the soldier I saw at Yellow Creek?" "Yes." But there was no mockery in her tone, only a simple statement of fact. The sound of movement on the ridge above decided the matter. Maxwell gathered their canteen and what supplies he could salvage from the saddlebags, then put down the injured horse with a quick, merciful shot. The sound would alert their pursuers, but it couldn't be helped. The crevice was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for Maxwell to squeeze through sideways. Nashota moved ahead of him, her slighter frame allowing her to navigate the tight passage with relative ease. The rock walls pressed in on all sides, scraping skin and catching on clothing. The air grew thin and dusty, making each breath a struggle. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the passage widened slightly, allowing them to move more freely. Light filtered down from above, revealing the passage to be a dried stream bed that had cut through the ridge over centuries. It wound upward, eventually opening onto a small plateau overlooking a different valley than the one they had left behind. Maxwell emerged into the sunlight, blinking and disoriented. Nashota was already scanning the new terrain, her expression focused. There, she said, pointing to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. A settlement, 3, perhaps 4 miles. Maxwell oriented himself, recognizing landmarks. That's not Royal Wells. It's the McCready trading post. He frowned, calculating distances and directions. We're off course. Way off course. That passage took us southeast, not west. Is this McCready a friend? Nashota asked. Not exactly, but he's no friend of the army either. He trades with Apache, Navajo, anyone with goods to barter. He might help us. Maxwell looked back at the narrow opening they had emerged from. One thing's certain, we can't go back the way we came. And on foot, in open country, we're too vulnerable. The trading post is our best option. The sun was past its zenith now, beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. They would need to move quickly to reach the trading post before dark. Without discussing it further, they set off, keeping to the sparse cover offered by occasional stands of juniper and rocky outcroppings. Maxwell set a pace that respected Nashota's still healing injuries without sacrificing too much speed. She matched him stride for stride, her endurance impressive despite her recent ordeal. They paused only once to drink sparingly from the canteen and scan the terrain behind them for signs of pursuit. "Do you think they found the passage?" Nashota asked as they rested briefly in the shadow of a large boulder. Maxwell shook his head. "Not likely. It was well hidden, and they'll be looking for tracks heading away from the ravine, not a hole in the rock wall. But they're scouts, good ones. They'll figure it out eventually. And then? Then we'd better be somewhere else." Maxwell rose, offering her his hand. "Come on, not much farther now." The trading post came into view just as the sun touched the distant mountains. It was a squat adobe structure with a corral for horses and several outbuildings, situated near a small spring that provided precious water in the arid landscape. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the warm glow of lamplight showed through the single window. A sign above the door, weather-beaten and faded, proclaimed, "McCready's Trading Post, all welcome, no questions asked." Maxwell approached cautiously, aware that in these uncertain times, anyone might be met with suspicion or outright hostility. He signaled for Nashota to wait in the shadow of the largest outbuilding while he went ahead to assess the situation. The door of the trading post swung open before he reached it, revealing a tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the light within. The unmistakable shape of a shotgun was visible in the man's hands. "That's far enough, stranger," a voice called out, rough with age and tobacco. "State your business." "Looking for shelter and a fair trade," Maxwell replied, keeping his hands visible. "Maxwell Sullivan. I've passed through before." There was a moment of silence, then the shotgun lowered slightly. "Sullivan? The Army scout who went hermit up in the Cibola Hills?" "The same. Heard you was dead." The figure stepped forward into the fading light, revealing a man in his 60s with a face like tanned leather and a shock of white hair pulled back in a queue. "You look half dead at that. What brings you to my door, looking like you wrestled a mountain lion?" "Long story, McCready. One better told inside, if you're willing." McCready squinted past him into the gathering dusk. "You alone?" Maxwell hesitated, then decided on honesty. "No, I have a companion, an Apache woman." "Apache?" McCready's eyebrows rose. "Hell of a time to be traveling with Apache, Sullivan. Army's got patrols out everywhere, looking for raiders." "She's not a raider. She's a friend." Maxwell met the older man's skeptical gaze steadily. "We need help, McCready. There are men after us, Army scouts. If you turn us away, I understand. But if there's any charity left in that miserly heart of yours, we could use it now." McCready studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Always was a fool for a lost cause. Bring her in quick before someone sees you standing out here like an invitation to trouble. Maxwell signaled to Nashota, who emerged from the shadows and approached with dignified caution. McCready's eyes widened slightly as she came into the light, his weathered face registering surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, "if it isn't the teller's granddaughter." Nashota stopped, clearly startled. "You knew my grandmother?" "Shima? Course I knew her. She traded here for years, finest beadwork in the territory." McCready lowered the shotgun completely. "You've got her eyes. And that mark on your wrist, the crescent moon." She had the same. Maxwell looked between them, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected connection. "Now I know there's a story here," McCready said, gesturing them inside, "and I reckon it's one I'd better hear." The interior of the trading post was cluttered but organized, the walls lined with shelves holding everything from canned goods to ammunition, from bolts of cloth to bags of coffee. A pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat, and a curtained doorway at the back presumably led to McCready's living quarters. A woman emerged from behind the curtain as they entered, small and wiry, with dark hair streaked with silver and the unmistakable features of Mexican heritage. She took in the newcomers with a quick, assessing glance. "Trouble, Jacob?" she asked McCready, her English accented but clear. "Isn't it always, Maria?" McCready replied with a hint of affection. "This here's Maxwell Sullivan, former Army scout, and the granddaughter of Shima, the Apache teller." Maria's expression softened at the mention of Shima. "You are welcome here," she said, addressing Nashota directly. "Your grandmother was a good woman. She helped me when our first child was born difficult." Nashota inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you. She spoke of a Mexican healer who lived at the trading post. That must have been you." "Sit, both of you," McCready interrupted. "Maria, we need food and coffee. Our guests look half-starved." While Maria busied herself at the stove, McCready gestured for Maxwell and Nashota to take seats at the small table in the corner. He joined them, leaning his shotgun against the wall within easy reach, a gesture that suggested his hospitality had limits. "Now," he said, fixing Maxwell with a penetrating stare, "suppose you tell me why an ex-Army scout and the granddaughter of an Apache elder are being chased by Army scouts. And don't spare the details. If I'm harboring fugitives, I want to know exactly what kind of fire I'm drawing." Maxwell exchanged a look with Nashota, receiving a small nod of permission. He began the story with Yellow Creek, explaining his connection to the massacre, his wife and son's fate, and how Nashota had found him after all these years. As he spoke, Maria brought bowls of hearty stew and mugs of strong coffee, listening silently from the edge of the room. When Maxwell reached the part about Caldwell's return and the staged Apache raids, McCready's expression darkened. "I knew something wasn't right about those raids," he said, interrupting. "Apache hit quick and clean, take what they need, leave the rest. These attacks, they were messy, vicious, bodies left on display, like some kind of warning. Never sat right with me." "Caldwell is creating a pretext," Nashota explained. "He wants to justify a full military campaign against my people, to drive them from the sacred valley he believes contains gold." "Jaguar Valley," McCready said with a nod. "The place your people go to pray. Caldwell's been obsessed with it for years. Thinks there's a fortune in gold hidden there." "There is no gold," Nashota said firmly. "Only sacred ground where our ancestors' spirits dwell. It is valuable to us, but not in the way Caldwell imagines." McCready snorted. "Try telling that to a man who dreams of riches. Gold fever makes men crazy, turns them into something less than human." "Caldwell was already something less than human," Maxwell said grimly. "Yellow Creek proved that." "So now you're planning to what? Take on Caldwell and the entire U.S. Army?" McCready shook his head. "That's suicide, Sullivan. Even if everything you say is true, even with those documents you mentioned, who's going to believe you over a decorated officer?" "Walsh might," Maxwell said. "He's sheriff in Royal Wells now. He served with us, saw what kind of man Caldwell really is." "Walsh is a good man," McCready acknowledged, "but one sheriff against Army brass, those are long odds." "We don't need the Army to believe us," Nashota interjected. "We need the newspapers, the territorial governor, people who can raise enough questions that Caldwell's plans are delayed, investigated." McCready considered this, absently stroking his beard. Might work. Santa Fe Times has a new editor, fella named Griswold. He's got a reputation for taking on corruption, not backing down easily. If you could get those documents to him, that's the plan, Maxwell confirmed. Or it was, until Caldwell's scouts found us. Now, I'm not sure we'll make it as far as Royal Wells, let alone Santa Fe. You won't, McCready said bluntly. Not on foot, not with Caldwell's men between you and town. He leaned back in his chair, studying them both. Then he added almost casually, your friend Walsh was through here last week. Maxwell straightened. Walsh? What was he doing out this way? Official business, he said. Showed me a fancy new badge. Territorial marshal now, not just sheriff. McCready's eyes narrowed. Asked a lot of questions about recent army movements. Mentioned Caldwell specifically. Said if anyone matching your description came through with an Apache woman, I was to send word to him in Santa Fe immediately. Santa Fe? Maxwell exchanged a puzzled look with Nashota. I thought he was based in Royal Wells. He's been making regular trips to the capital these past few months, working on something big, from what I gathered. McCready stroked his beard thoughtfully. I've got a writer I trust. Could have a message to Walsh in Santa Fe by tomorrow noon if you think that would help. Maxwell considered this new information. Do it. Tell him we're heading that way with evidence about Yellow Creek and the fake raids. He paused. If Walsh is already building a case against Caldwell, might be the ally you need, McCready finished. Now, about getting you to Santa Fe. Maxwell and Nashota exchanged glances. After days of relentless pursuit and narrow escapes, a flicker of hope kindled in their eyes. What do you have in mind? Maxwell asked, his voice low with cautious optimism. McCready stroked his beard, his weathered face set in determination. A route few know about, horses that won't quit, and, he paused, a hint of a smile crossing his face. Something to even your odds if it comes to a fight. Maria nodded solemnly from where she stood by the stove. Jacob never goes halfway when he chooses a side, she said. If he says he can help, then you can trust his word. Damn right, McCready confirmed, pushing himself to his feet with newfound energy. Now let me show you what I've got. The floorboards creaked under McCready's determined steps as he crossed the trading post's main room. Night had fully settled outside, wrapping the building in darkness broken only by the warm glow of oil lamps. In the shadows, Maxwell and Nashota's faces showed equal parts exhaustion and resolve, the look of people who had come too far to turn back now. McCready rose from the table and moved to a large cabinet behind the trading post's counter. He unlocked it with a key from his pocket, revealing an impressive array of weapons, rifles, shotguns, pistols, and ammunition of various calibers. First things first, he said, selecting a Winchester repeating rifle and checking its action. You'll need better firepower than that old Sharps you're carrying, Sullivan. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. I've managed well enough with it so far. Against 3 bounty hunters, maybe, but against Caldwell's trained scouts, you'll need every advantage. McCready handed him the Winchester, along with a box of cartridges. 15 rounds without reloading. Faster and more accurate than what you've got. Nashota watched the exchange with quiet interest. McCready noticed her gaze and hesitated, then reached back into the cabinet and withdrew a well-maintained Colt revolver. You know how to use one of these? He asked her. Yes, Nashota replied simply. My husband taught me before he was killed. McCready nodded and passed her the weapon, along with a belt holster and ammunition. Good. Where you're headed, you'll need it, Maxwell frowned. And where exactly are we headed, McCready? You said yourself we won't make it to Royal Wells with Caldwell's men between us and town. McCready moved to a shelf and pulled down a rolled piece of parchment, a map, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. He spread it on the table, weighing down the corners with small stones. Royal Wells is here, he said, pointing to a spot on the map. We're here. Caldwell's scouts were last seen here, in Thunder Canyon. By now, they've probably figured out you escaped through that passage and are working their way around to the trading post. So we're already trapped, Maxwell observed grimly. Not necessarily. McCready traced a route with his finger. There's an old Apache trail that runs through the high country, eventually comes down near Black Mesa. From there, it's only a day's ride to Santa Fe. Santa Fe? Maxwell shook his head. We were heading for Royal Wells to meet Walsh. And Caldwell knows that, McCready pointed out. He'll have men watching every trail to Warrior. But Santa Fe, that's territorial government. Newspapers, Army command. A bigger risk for you, but a bigger risk for him, too. Nashota studied the map intently. I know this trail. My people used it to trade with the northern pueblos. It is difficult terrain, narrow passes, little water. And that's exactly why Caldwell's men won't be watching it, McCready said. They'll expect you to take an easier route, something more direct. Maxwell considered the plan. Going to Santa Fe meant bypassing Walsh, whom he trusted, and heading straight into a city full of strangers. But McCready was right. It also meant bypassing the trap Caldwell had undoubtedly set for them. We'd need horses, Maxwell said. Supplies, water. I can provide those, McCready replied. 2 horses, provisions for 5 days, canteens. It's the least I can do for Shima's granddaughter. He glanced at Nashota. Your grandmother saved Maria's life and our first child's. That creates a debt not easily repaid. Maria, who had been quietly listening, spoke up from her position near the stove. You should go tonight, under cover of darkness. The moon is new, good for hiding, bad for those who search. Maxwell exchanged a look with Nashota, silently assessing her condition. The journey McCready proposed would be grueling, especially for someone still recovering from injury and exhaustion. But she met his gaze steadily, determination evident in every line of her face. We'll leave at midnight, Maxwell decided. If Caldwell's scouts are tracking us, they'll expect us to rest until dawn. McCready nodded his approval. Smart. I'll have the horses ready. In the meantime, you both should eat more and rest while you can. Maria will show you to the back room. As Maria led them behind the curtain to a small but clean room with 2 narrow cots, Maxwell felt a weight shift inside him. After years of running from his past, he was now running toward a confrontation he had long avoided. The prospect filled him with dread, but also with a strange sense of purpose he had not felt since before Yellow Creek. You should sleep, Nashota said softly, sitting on one of the cots. I can see the weariness in your eyes, Maxwell shook his head. Too much to think about. Thinking will not make the trail easier or our enemies fewer. She gestured to the other cot. Rest, Maxwell Sullivan. Tomorrow we will need all our strength. Oh no, there was a gentle authority in her voice that reminded him oddly of Mary. His wife had possessed the same ability to cut through his stubbornness with simple, irrefutable logic. He found himself smiling faintly at the memory, surprised that it brought comfort rather than pain. You sound like her sometimes, he said, sitting down on the edge of the cot. Mary, she never let me brood either. Nashota's expression softened. Your wife was wise. My grandmother spoke well of her, said she had a spirit that shone even in the darkest times. Maxwell lay back, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling. She deserved better than what happened to her. Better than me. Perhaps, Nashota said, her voice gentle but honest. But she chose you, and she never blamed you for Yellow Creek. That is clear in her letters. Maxwell closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle over him like a heavy blanket. Get some rest, Nashota. Like you said, tomorrow will demand all our strength. He didn't expect to sleep, but the next thing he knew, Maria was gently shaking his shoulder. The room was dark, lit only by a single candle she held. It is time, she whispered. McCready has the horses ready. Maxwell sat up, immediately alert. Beside him, Nashota was already awake, gathering her few possessions. She had tied her hair back with a leather thong, and her face was set in lines of quiet determination. Maria led them through the trading post to the back door, where McCready waited with 2 horses, sturdy Mustangs, not flashy, but well-suited to the rough country they would need to traverse. Saddlebags bulged with supplies, and canteens were strapped securely to each saddle. The moon's still down, McCready said in a low voice. You've got about 6 hours of darkness. Make the most of it. Stay high, keep to the rocky ground where you can, harder to track that way. He handed Maxwell a folded paper. Map to the trail. Once you're on it, follow the old mine blazes, slash marks on the trees, cairns in the open country. They'll lead you through. Maxwell tucked the map inside his shirt. Thank you, McCready. I won't forget this. Don't thank me yet. You still got a hard road ahead. McCready turned to Nashota, his weathered face solemn. Your grandmother was a woman of great courage. I see the same in you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he pressed into her hand. Shima left this with me years ago, said someday her blood would come claiming it. Guess that day is today. Nashoda opened the pouch, tipping its contents into her palm. A silver ring gleamed in the faint light, set with a small piece of turquoise in the shape of a crescent moon. My grandfather's, she said softly, recognition in her voice. I thought it was lost at Yellow Creek. Shima recovered it, said it would protect her descendants when the time of greatest trial came. McCready shrugged, a hint of embarrassment on his face. I'm not one for superstitions, but I've lived out here long enough to know there's more to this world than what we can see with our eyes. Nashoda slipped the ring onto her finger, then impulsively embraced the old trader. Thank you for keeping it safe and for helping us now. McCready cleared his throat gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with the display of emotion. Yes, well, best get moving. Dawn waits for no one, and neither does Caldwell. They mounted in silence, Maxwell adjusting to the unfamiliar feel of a new horse beneath him. The animal seemed steady enough, responding well to subtle pressure from his knees and the lightest touch on the reins. Maria opened the back gate, which led directly into the darkness of the desert beyond. Go with God, she whispered, or with whatever spirits watch over travelers in the night. With a final nod of thanks, Maxwell and Nashoda rode out into the darkness, leaving the warm light of the trading post behind. For several minutes, they moved at a careful walk, letting their eyes adjust to the night. The desert around them was transformed into a landscape of deep shadows and subtle gradations of black and gray, the stars overhead providing just enough light to distinguish terrain features. We'll head northeast for the first few miles, Maxwell said, consulting McCready's map by the faint starlight. There's a dry wash that will take us up toward the high country without leaving obvious tracks. Nashoda nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. If Caldwell's scouts have found the trading post, they will assume we continued west toward Royal Wells. This may buy us some time. As they rode through a narrow pass between jagged rocks, Maxwell found his thoughts returning to what McCready had told them about Walsh. I've known Walsh since our Army days, he said. Always struck me as a man who keeps his principles, even when it costs him. Nashoda looked over at him. You trust him completely? Maxwell considered the question. I thought I did, but it's been years since I've seen him regularly. And now this business about him being territorial marshal, investigating Caldwell. He frowned. Seems like there's more happening than he told me in Royal Wells. Could be a trap, Nashoda suggested, ever cautious. Caldwell has influence. Perhaps your friend has been compromised. Walsh wouldn't turn, Maxwell said firmly, but you're right to be careful. When we reach Santa Fe, we approach with caution. Verify who's really on our side before we reveal what we know. Nashoda nodded approval. Wise, my grandmother used to say, even trusted water should be tested before a long journey. She paused. If your friend truly is building a case against Caldwell, our evidence could be the missing piece he needs. And if he's gathered his own evidence, Maxwell added, we might finally have enough to bring Caldwell down for good. They rode in silence for the next hour, Maxwell leading the way based on his years of experience navigating the territory. The dry wash appeared exactly where McCready's map indicated, a ghostly scar in the earth that wound its way toward the distant mountains. Your grandmother, Maxwell said, breaking the silence. She must have been quite a woman. Nashoda glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her features at the unexpected comment. She was, strong but not hard, wise but never prideful about her wisdom. She touched the ring on her finger. After Yellow Creek, when so many were lost, it was she who held our remaining people together. She who helped us find a way forward, even in grief. And she who preserved the truth, Maxwell added. Mary's letters, the soldier's journal. Yes, she believed that truth has power beyond words on paper, that it lives in the telling, in the remembering. Nashoda's voice softened with memory. She used to say, what is forgotten can never heal, but what is remembered can never truly die. The words struck Maxwell with unexpected force. For years he had tried to forget. Yellow Creek, Mary, Tom, the man he had been before. He had buried himself in isolation, thinking that forgetting would bring peace. But Shima's wisdom suggested a different path, that healing came not from forgetting, but from remembering, from carrying the truth forward. Your grandmother sounds a lot like Mary, he said after a moment. She had that same clarity, that same faith that truth matters, even when the world seems determined to bury it. Nashoda's expression warmed slightly. I wish I had known her. My grandmother spoke of her with great respect. She would have liked you, Maxwell said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. She always saw strength where others saw only differences. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they continued their journey. The wash gradually narrowed and deepened, its sandy bottom giving way to rocky terrain as they climbed higher into the foothills. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, they had gained considerable elevation, the trading post now a distant speck in the vast desert below. Maxwell called a halt in a sheltered draw where a cluster of stunted pine trees provided both cover and the first real vegetation they had encountered since leaving McCready's. We'll rest here briefly, he said, dismounting stiffly. Let the horses drink and graze a bit. We should be on the Apache Trail by midday if we maintain this pace. Nashoda slid from her horse with more grace, though Maxwell noticed she favored her injured arm slightly. They shared a sparing breakfast from their supplies, jerky, hardtack, and water from their canteens, while the horse had cropped the sparse vegetation. As the light strengthened, Maxwell studied their surroundings with greater clarity. The vantage point offered a commanding view of the country they had traversed, as well as the route ahead. Far to the southwest, a cloud of dust caught his attention, riders moving fast along the main trail toward the trading post. Caldwell's men, he said grimly, pointing. Looks like a full patrol, not just scouts. Nashoda followed his gaze, her expression hardening. They will question McCready and Maria. McCready can handle himself. He's survived out here for decades by knowing when to talk and when to keep silent. Maxwell hoped his confidence was justified. Besides, they have nothing to connect them to us except proximity. And McCready's known for trading with everyone, Apache included. Nashoda didn't look convinced, but she made no argument. Instead, she studied the terrain ahead, her eyes tracing the route they would need to take to reach the Apache Trail. There, she said, pointing to a distinctive rock formation that resembled a hawk's head. The trail passes behind that formation, then follows the ridge east before turning north into the high country. Maxwell nodded, impressed by her knowledge of the landscape. You know this country well. My people have traveled these paths for generations. The knowledge is passed down, mother to daughter, father to son. There was a hint of sadness in her voice. Few remain now who remember all the old ways, the old trails. Maxwell understood the loss she referenced, not just of lives at places like Yellow Creek, but of an entire way of life, a relationship with the land that had sustained her people for centuries. They continued their journey as the day warmed, the morning coolness giving way to the relentless sun of late fall. The terrain grew increasingly challenging. Steep slopes covered in loose shale, narrow passes where they had to dismount and lead the horses single file, dry stream beds that offered the only practical route through otherwise impassable country. By midday, as Maxwell had predicted, they reached the Apache Trail. Unlike the crude paths they had been following, this was a well-established route, marked periodically with small cairns of stacked stones or slash marks cut into the trunks of trees. Though clearly ancient, the trail showed signs of recent use. Horse droppings, the occasional broken branch, a scrap of cloth caught on a thorny bush. Your people still use this trail? Maxwell asked as they paused to rest the horses in the shade of a large boulder. Nashoda nodded. Some, those who still trade with the northern pueblos, those who wish to avoid the soldiers at Fort Davis. Why, she gestured to the marks on a nearby pine tree, not just the traditional slash marks, but smaller symbols carved beneath them. These tell of water ahead and of soldiers seen near the valley fork, warnings for those who follow. Maxwell studied the symbols with new interest. In his years as a scout, he had learned to read some Apache signs, but these were more complex, a language within a language that only the initiated could fully understand. Can you read all of them? He asked. Most, Nashoda replied. My grandmother taught me. She said knowledge of the old ways might someday mean the difference between life and death. She traced one of the symbols with her fingertip. This one warns of a mountain lion with cubs near the next water source. This one speaks of good hunting in the valley to the east. She pointed to a third mark, her expression sobering. And this one tells of white men in Apache dress, raiding and killing to the south. Caldwell's false raiders, Maxwell said grimly. Yes, my people know they are not Apache, despite their disguises, but the settlers do not know this, or do not wish to know. Nashoda's voice held no bitterness, only a weary acceptance of this reality. They continued along the trail, making good progress through the afternoon. The path wound ever higher into the mountains, offering breathtaking views of the desert below. In another time, under different circumstances, Maxwell might have appreciated the stark beauty of the landscape. Now he valued it primarily for the tactical advantage it provided, the ability to spot pursuit long before it reached them. As evening approached, they came upon a small, hidden spring, a trickle of water seeping from a rock face into a natural stone basin, surrounded by a patch of grass and stunted trees. It was an oasis in the otherwise arid landscape, clearly a traditional stopping point for travelers on the trail. We'll make camp here, Maxwell decided. Water for the horses, shelter from the wind, and a defensible position if we need it. They unsaddled the horses and set up a small camp, gathering wood for a fire that they would light only after dark to minimize the chance of the smoke being spotted. While Nashoda prepared a simple meal from their provisions, Maxwell scouted the area, identifying escape routes and potential defensive positions should they be discovered. When he returned, he found Nashoda sitting quietly by the unlit fire. The documents from Yellow Creek spread on a flat rock before her. She was reading Mary's letters again, her expression thoughtful. "Your wife had a strong spirit," she said as Maxwell sat beside her. Even in her final days, she thought not of herself, but of justice for others. Maxwell nodded, his throat tight with emotion. That was Mary, always fighting for what she believed in, even when the odds were against her. She's the reason I became a scout, you know. She believed we could help build understanding between our worlds, create a path to peace. He laughed softly, the sound hollow with remembered pain. I was a fool to think the army wanted the same thing. Not a fool, Nashoda countered, a man of hope, as she was a woman of hope. Without such people, the world would be darker still. She gathered the documents carefully, returning them to their protective pouch. We carry their hope now, in these papers, in our journey. As night fell, they lit a small, carefully shielded fire, more for light than warmth. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear mountain air, a vast tapestry of light against the absolute darkness. I'll take first watch, Maxwell said as they finished their meal. You should rest. Nashoda nodded, wrapping herself in the blanket McCready had provided. She settled near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow, her hand resting lightly on the Colt revolver beside her. Maxwell moved to a position where he could observe the trail below their campsite, rifle across his knees. The night was quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of wildlife in the underbrush, and the soft breathing of the horses. He found his thoughts drifting, not to the past for once, but to the uncertain future that awaited them in Santa Fe. Even if they reached the territorial capital safely, even if they succeeded in presenting their evidence to the newspaper editor McCready had mentioned, there was no guarantee of success. Caldwell was powerful, connected, protected by the same military hierarchy that had covered up Yellow Creek. And Maxwell himself was a discredited former scout, a recluse whose word carried little weight in official circles. The odds were against them, had been from the start. Yet here they were, continuing the journey that Mary had begun 12 years ago with her letters, that Shima had preserved through years of patient waiting, that Nashoda had risked her life to complete by finding him. There was something powerful in that continuity, that stubborn refusal to let truth be buried by time or fear. The hours of his watch passed quietly, the moon rising to cast silver light across the landscape. When it was time to wake Nashoda for her turn, he found her already stirring, as if some internal sense had alerted her to the changing of the guard. All quiet? She asked, sitting up and reaching for her boots. So far, but we should be vigilant. This is a known stopping point on the trail. If anyone else is traveling this route, Nashoda nodded her understanding. I will watch. You sleep now. Maxwell settled into the warm spot she had vacated, his body aching with the day's exertions. Despite his concerns, sleep came quickly. deep and dreamless. He woke to Nashoda's hand on his shoulder, her voice low and urgent in his ear. Riders coming, 6, maybe 7, moving fast along the trail. Maxwell was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle as he rose to a crouch. The sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray, providing enough visibility to see the dust rising from the trail below. Army? He asked, straining to make out details. I think so. Blue uniforms, riding in formation. Nashoda's voice was calm, but Maxwell could see the tension in her posture. They're following our trail. Maxwell's mind raced through options. We need to move. Nah, leave no trace we were here. They broke camp with practiced efficiency, scattering the ashes of their small fire, erasing all signs of their presence. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving again, taking a narrow game trail that branched off from the main Apache path, leading higher into the mountains. This way is longer, Nashoda explained, as they picked their way through a rocky pass, but less traveled. It rejoins the main trail beyond Black Mesa. They rode hard through the morning, pushing the horses as much as the difficult terrain would allow. The game trail was barely visible in places, requiring Nashoda's knowledge and Maxwell's scouting skills to follow. It led them through dense stands of pine and across small, high meadows where the frost still clung to the grass despite the strengthening sun. By midday, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers, though Maxwell had no illusions that they had lost them completely. Army scouts were skilled trackers, and Caldwell would have chosen his best for this mission. They paused briefly to rest the horses and consult McCready's map. According to both the map and Nashoda's knowledge, they were making good progress toward Black Mesa. If they maintained their pace, they could reach the northern side of the mesa by nightfall, and from there it was a relatively straight path to Santa Fe. We're making good time, Maxwell observed, folding the map and tucking it away. Better than I expected on this route. Nashoda nodded, though her expression remained solemn. The spirits favor our journey, but we must not become complacent. Caldwell's men are persistent. As if to emphasize her warning, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed through the mountains. Both Maxwell and Nashoda froze, listening intently. Another shot followed, then a third. Not aimed at us, Maxwell said after a moment. Too far away, wrong direction. Sounds like they're shooting at something or someone else. Nashoda's expression grew troubled. There are Apache camps in those hills, small family groups, women and children mostly, with a few old men to protect them. The implications were clear. Caldwell's men, frustrated in their pursuit, might be taking out their aggression on any Apache they encountered. We can't go back, Maxwell said, hating the necessity of the words. If we turn around now, everything we've done, everything Mary and your grandmother sacrificed for, will be for nothing. Nashoda's face showed her inner conflict, the desire to help her people warring with the larger mission they had undertaken. Finally, she nodded. You are right. We must continue to Santa Fe. It is the only way to truly help my people. All of them, not just those in immediate danger. They rode on, though the sound of the distant gunfire haunted them both. Maxwell found himself thinking of Yellow Creek, of his own failure to prevent that massacre. Was history repeating itself? Was he once again choosing the abstract future over immediate action? As if sensing his thoughts, Nashoda spoke. You cannot save everyone, Maxwell Sullivan. No man can. But you can help create a world where such saving is not needed. He glanced at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. Your grandmother's teaching? My own, she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. Though she would approve, I think. They reached the northern slopes of Black Mesa as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. The mesa itself was a formidable natural feature, a flat-top mountain with steep, nearly vertical sides, visible for miles in every direction. According to McCready's map, the trail they sought wound around its eastern flank before descending toward the high desert that surrounded Santa Fe. We should make camp while there's still light, Maxwell suggested. Find water if we can. The horses are near their limit. Nashoda agreed, and they set about establishing a small, defensible camp in a rocky hollow that offered some protection from the wind and prying eyes. There was no water nearby, but their canteen still held enough for the night, and McCready's map indicated a stream not far from their projected path for the morning. As they settled in for the night, Maxwell found himself studying Nashota in the fading light. The journey had taken its toll. There were shadows under her eyes, and the wound on her arm had begun to seep again after the hard riding. Yet she maintained a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "We should reach Santa Fe by tomorrow evening," he said, offering her a share of their dwindling provisions. "What then? Neither of us exactly fits in with city folk." Nashota accepted the food with a nod of thanks. McCready mentioned a newspaper editor. "Griswold. We find him, show him the documents, tell him what we know of Caldwell's plans. And if he doesn't believe us, if he sides with Caldwell, then we find someone who will listen, the territorial governor perhaps, or a judge." Nashota's expression was determined. "The truth must be told, Maxwell. For Yellow Creek, for your wife and son, for my people." Maxwell nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. The world was rarely kind to truth-tellers, especially when the truth they carried threatened powerful men. "Get some rest," he said finally. "I'll take first watch again." But as he settled into his observation point, rifle ready across his knees, Maxwell found his gaze drawn to Nashota's sleeping form. In these few days of shared danger, she had rekindled something he had thought extinguished, not just purpose, but connection. She embodied the principles he had once lived by, before grief buried them alongside Mary and Tom. The night passed without incident, and dawn found them already on the move, navigating the narrow trail that wound around the base of Black Mesa. The terrain was treacherous in places, sheer drops to one side, unstable rock slides on the other, requiring all their concentration. By mid-morning, they had cleared the most dangerous sections and were descending gradually toward the high desert plateau. The landscape opened up around them, offering both greater visibility and greater vulnerability. Maxwell found himself constantly scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of pursuit. "How far to Santa Fe?" he asked as they paused to water the horses at the small stream marked on McCready's map. Nashota studied the distant mountains. "If we maintain this pace, we should reach the outskirts by sunset. The city itself lies in a valley beyond that far ridge." They pressed on, the miles rolling away beneath their horses' hooves. The air grew warmer as they descended, the pine forest giving way to scattered juniper and pinyon, then to the sparse vegetation of the high desert. Signs of human habitation began to appear, occasional tracks of wagons or riders, the distant smoke of a ranch house or homestead. It was late afternoon when they crested a final ridge, and the city of Santa Fe lay spread before them in the valley below. From this distance, it appeared as a sprawling collection of low, earth-colored buildings, dominated by the spire of the cathedral and the larger government structures around the central plaza. "We made it," Maxwell said, a note of disbelief in his voice. After days of hard riding, constant vigilance, and the ever-present fear of capture, the sight of their destination seemed almost unreal. "Not yet," Nashota cautioned. "The city gates are still far, and Caldwell may have men watching the approaches." She was right, of course. The open country between their position and the city offered little cover, and travelers would be visible for miles. If Caldwell had indeed guessed their destination and sent riders ahead, they could still be intercepted before reaching safety. "We'll approach from the east," Maxwell decided, studying the terrain. "Follow that arroyo as far as it goes, then use the orchard groves for cover. Once we're near the city, we'll separate. I'll go in first, draw attention if there's any to be drawn. You follow when it's clear. Meet me at the cathedral." Nashota frowned. "A dangerous plan. If you are captured, I won't be carrying the documents." "You will." Maxwell met her gaze steadily. "If something happens to me, you continue on. Find Griswold. Show him everything." "I did not come this far to abandon you at the final step," Nashota said firmly. "Not abandonment, strategy." Maxwell's voice softened. "Mary sacrificed everything to preserve these truths. Your grandmother did the same. We cannot risk losing them now, not when we're so close." Reluctantly, Nashota nodded her agreement. They transferred all the documents to her saddlebags, along with enough provisions for a day on her own if the worst should happen. Then they began their careful approach to Santa Fe, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. The arroyo provided good concealment for the first mile, allowing them to move relatively quickly while remaining hidden from casual observation. As they neared the outskirts of the city, The land became more cultivated. Small fields, orchards, and the occasional adobe farmhouse breaking up the desert landscape. "This is where we separate," Maxwell said as they reached the edge of an apple orchard. "Wait here until you see me reach that church on the outskirts. If all is clear, I'll wave my hat. If not, if there's trouble, don't wait. Find another way in." Nashoda nodded, though her expression showed her dislike of the plan. "Be careful, Maxwell Sullivan. We have come too far to lose each other now." The unexpected softness in her voice caught him off guard. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a thousand unspoken words passing between them. Then Maxwell turned and urged his horse forward, emerging from the cover of the orchard onto the main road that led into Santa Fe. He rode openly, making no attempt to hide himself, his posture deliberately casual. To any observer, he would appear to be just another traveler approaching the city as evening fell, dusty, trail-worn, but unremarkable. The road grew more traveled as he neared the city, other riders and the occasional wagon sharing the road. No one paid him particular attention, and Maxwell began to hope that Caldwell had not, in fact, anticipated their destination. Perhaps the Army scouts were still searching the Apache Trail, or had assumed they would head for Royal Wells after all. The small church came into view, a simple adobe structure with a wooden cross atop its bell tower. Maxwell reined in beside it, dismounting as if to rest his horse. He scanned the road behind him, searching for any sign of Nashoda or potential pursuers. Seeing nothing amiss, he removed his hat and waved it once, the agreed-upon signal. He was about to remount when a voice called his name, not from behind, where Nashoda waited, but from the shadow of the church doorway. "Maxwell Sullivan, been a long time." Maxwell turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver, then freezing as he recognized the man who emerged from the church. Colonel Daniel Caldwell looked much as he had 12 years ago, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same cold blue eyes and thin-lipped smile that had haunted Maxwell's nightmares. His uniform was more decorated now, the insignia of his higher rank prominent on his collar, but the man himself seemed unchanged by time. "Caldwell." Maxwell kept his voice level, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Fancy meeting you here." "Not fancy at all. Quite predictable, in fact." Caldwell gestured, and 4 soldiers emerged from positions around the church, rifles trained on Maxwell. "Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate your moves? That I wouldn't have men watching every approach to Santa Fe?" Maxwell's mind raced. If Caldwell was here, that meant he had guessed their plan, perhaps even their specific destination. But had he spotted Nashoda? Was she still safely hidden in the orchard? Or had she walked into a trap as well? "I don't know what you're talking about," Maxwell said, playing for time. "I'm just passing through on my way to Santa Fe." Caldwell laughed, the sound as mirthless as Maxwell remembered. "Save the act, Sullivan. I know you have the Apache woman with you, Shima's granddaughter. I know about the documents she carries. Did you really think an old woman's ramblings and a disgraced scout's testimony would be enough to bring me down?" "Maybe not," Maxwell acknowledged. "But a soldier's journal detailing your orders? Mary's letters describing what she witnessed? Those might carry some weight, even against a decorated officer." Something flickered in Caldwell's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or anger at the mention of specific evidence he hadn't known about. "Where is she? Where is the Apache woman?" "Gone," Maxwell lied smoothly. "We separated days ago. She's probably halfway to Washington by now, documents in hand." "You're lying." Caldwell stepped closer, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "She wouldn't leave you. Not after tracking you for months, not after risking everything to find you." Maxwell shrugged, affecting a casualness he didn't feel. "Shows what you know about Apache women. They're practical. Once she had what she needed from me, confirmation of what happened at Yellow Creek, she had no further use for a washed-up scout." Caldwell studied him, clearly trying to determine if he was telling the truth. "Search the area," he ordered his men. "She's here somewhere. Find her." 2 of the soldiers moved off immediately, heading in the direction of the orchard where Maxwell had left Nashoda. He silently prayed she had seen the confrontation and had the sense to retreat, to find another way into the city. "You've lost, Caldwell," Maxwell said, drawing the colonel's attention back to him. "Even if you find her, even if you kill us both, it's too late. Copies of everything were sent ahead. to the territorial governor, to newspapers in Santa Fe and Denver. It was a desperate bluff, but Maxwell put all his conviction behind the words. Caldwell hesitated, doubt clouding his features momentarily before his usual confidence reasserted itself. Nice try, Sullivan, but I control the telegraph lines. I have men at every stage stop. Nothing leaves this territory without my knowledge. He drew his revolver, pointing it casually at Maxwell's chest. Now, why don't you tell me the truth? Where is the Apache woman, and where are the documents? Before Maxwell could respond, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed from the direction of the orchard. One of Caldwell's soldiers cried out in pain. A second shot followed, and another soldier fell. Caldwell swore, spinning toward the sound. It's her! Get her! Maxwell seized the moment of distraction. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Caldwell's midsection, sending them both crashing to the ground. The colonel's revolver discharged harmlessly into the air as they fell, then skittered across the packed earth as Maxwell knocked it from his hand. They grappled in the dust, each fighting for advantage. Caldwell was larger and younger, but Maxwell fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He landed a solid punch to Caldwell's jaw, then another to his ribs, before the colonel managed to throw him off. Caldwell scrambled for his revolver, but Maxwell was faster, drawing his own weapon and aiming it squarely at the colonel's chest. Don't move, Maxwell ordered, his voice deadly calm. Caldwell froze, hands raised slightly, his eyes calculating. The remaining soldiers had taken cover, uncertain what to do with their commander at gunpoint. You won't shoot me, Caldwell said confidently. You don't have it in you. You didn't at Yellow Creek, and you don't now. You're right, Maxwell acknowledged. I won't murder you in cold blood. Unlike you, I still believe in justice. He raised his voice, addressing the soldiers without taking his eyes off Caldwell. Your colonel ordered the massacre of innocent civilians at Yellow Creek 12 years ago. Women, children. Then he covered it up, blamed it on hostile Apache. He's doing the same thing now, staging raids, killing settlers, blaming it on Apache to justify wiping them out. He's lying, Caldwell shouted. He's deranged. Shoot him. The soldiers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Before anyone could act, the sound of approaching riders drew everyone's attention. A group of men in civilian clothes but carrying rifles galloped up to the church, led by a tall figure Maxwell recognized with a surge of relief. That's enough, Harrison Walsh called, dismounting with his rifle ready. Everyone lower your weapons, now! The soldiers looked to Caldwell for direction, but Walsh's next words changed the equation significantly. By the authority vested in me as territorial marshal, I'm placing Colonel Daniel Caldwell under arrest for the murder of civilians at Yellow Creek, for conspiracy against the United States government, and for the unlawful persecution of Apache peoples under territorial protection. Maxwell stared at Walsh, surprised at his timing but not his presence. Your men have been following us? Walsh offered a tight smile. Not following, waiting. McCready's rider reached me yesterday. I've had deputies watching all approaches to Santa Fe since dawn. He turned to Caldwell. As for you, Colonel, I've been building this case for 6 months, tracking your movements, documenting your operations, collecting witness testimony from survivors of your staged raids. This is outrageous, Caldwell sputtered. You have no authority over military operations. I have every authority when those operations include murdering civilians and framing innocent people, Walsh countered. He glanced back at Maxwell. I tried to tell you in Royal Wells that things were in motion, but couldn't say too much. Too many ears in a small town. The governor himself authorized this investigation after the third Apache raid showed signs of being staged. Maxwell nodded slowly. And now you have what you need to finish it. With the documents you and the lady brought, Walsh confirmed, we have the missing piece, the connection to Yellow Creek that shows this isn't Caldwell's first massacre. He nodded to someone behind Maxwell, which I believe you and the lady have provided. Maxwell turned to see Nashota approaching, flanked by 2 of Walsh's deputies. She appeared unharmed, her expression composed as always, though relief showed in her eyes when they met Maxwell's. Nashota, he breathed. How? I saw Caldwell's men before they saw me, she explained. I circled around, found another road into town. Marshal Walsh was already looking for you. McCready sent a rider ahead with warning of our arrival. Walsh nodded confirmation. Old McCready's been my eyes and ears in the backcountry for years. When his rider brought word that Maxwell Sullivan was headed to Santa Fe with evidence against Caldwell, I assembled a team and watched the approaches to the city. Caldwell, still held at gunpoint, laughed bitterly. Evidence? The ramblings of an Apache woman and a disgraced scout? No court will take their word over mine. Perhaps not, Walsh agreed. But they might take the word of a territorial marshal who witnessed you ordering your men to disguise themselves as Apache and raid settler homesteads. He smiled coldly at Caldwell's shocked expression. Yes, Colonel, I've had men watching your operations for months, gathering their own evidence, independent of anything Sullivan and the lady brought. Caldwell's confident facade crumbled. His gaze darted between Walsh, Maxwell, and the armed deputies surrounding them, clearly calculating his chances of escape and finding them non-existent. You've got nothing, he snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. This is all hearsay and circumstantial evidence. We'll let a judge decide that, Walsh replied calmly. He nodded to his deputies. Take him into custody, carefully. As the deputies moved to handcuff Caldwell, Maxwell finally lowered his revolver, the tension of the confrontation draining from him and leaving him suddenly exhausted. Nashada moved to his side, her presence a steadying influence. It's over, she said softly. We've done what we came to do. Maxwell looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the proud Apache woman who had fought so hard for justice, but the person she had become to him over their journey. A partner, a friend, perhaps something more that neither of them had yet defined. No, he said, his voice equally soft. It's not over. It's just beginning. Walsh approached them as his deputies led Caldwell away. You two look like you've been through hell, he observed. Come on. There's a place in town where you can rest, clean up. Tomorrow we'll talk properly about all this. He glanced at the documents Nashota still carried. Those papers, they're going to be crucial in building the case against Caldwell. They're yours, Nashota said. My grandmother preserved them for this purpose, so that truth would not be lost. The three of them rode into Santa Fe as the last light faded from the sky. The city was coming alive with evening activities. Lamps being lit, music drifting from cantinas, the smell of cooking fires and food filling the air. It seemed a world away from the desert solitude Maxwell had known for so long, from the desperate journey they had just completed. Walsh led them to a small but respectable inn near the central plaza, arranging rooms for them and ensuring they would not be disturbed. Before leaving them to their rest, he paused, his expression serious. What you've done, both of you, it's going to make a difference. Not just for Caldwell and his crimes, but for relations between settlers and Apache in the territory. It won't fix everything overnight, but it's a start. After Walsh had gone, Maxwell and Nashota found themselves standing awkwardly in the hallway between their assigned rooms. So much had happened, so quickly, that neither seemed certain what to say now that the immediate danger had passed. You should rest, Maxwell said finally. It's been a long journey. Nashota nodded but made no move toward her door. What will you do now, Maxwell Sullivan? Now that justice is in motion, now that your ghosts may finally rest? It was a question Maxwell had not allowed himself to consider, focused as he had been on the immediate goals of their journey. The future beyond this moment had seemed like a distant, unlikely prospect. I don't know, he admitted. I can't go back to what I was before, the hermit in the desert, hiding from the world and from myself. He met her gaze directly. What about you? Will you return to your people? Those that remain are scattered, living in small bands, always moving to avoid the soldiers. Her expression softened. But perhaps, when word spreads of Caldwell's arrest, of the truth about the raids, they may begin to gather again. To rebuild. 3 months later, they stood together on a rocky overlook, watching as a small caravan of Apache families made their way into the protected valley below. The territorial governor, moved by the evidence they had presented and pressed by Walsh's persistent advocacy, had designated this land as a sanctuary, a place where Nashota's people could settle without fear of harassment or displacement. 6 families this week, Maxwell noted, his voice quiet with wonder. That makes 23 since winter broke. Nashota nodded. the silver crescent moon pendant catching the sunlight as it hung around her neck. Word spread slowly, but it spreads. Those who survived Yellow Creek, those who fled Fort Adams, they remember the stories of Shima's granddaughter and the White Scout who spoke truth to power. The trial of Colonel Daniel Caldwell had sent shock waves through the territory. Though the military had initially tried to dismiss the charges, the evidence proved too compelling to ignore, especially once Griswold's newspaper published Mary's letters and excerpts from the soldier's journal. 3 of Caldwell's officers had testified against him, detailing the plan to disguise soldiers as Apache raiders. The merchants who had funded the scheme in hopes of securing mining rights to Jaguar Valley now faced their own legal troubles. In the wake of the scandal, policies toward the Apache were being cautiously reevaluated. The new military commander, a career soldier with a reputation for fairness, had established protocols to prevent future abuses. While mistrust remained on both sides, small steps toward understanding were being taken. Maxwell and Nashota had been at the center of these changes, testifying at hearings, meeting with officials, and serving as intermediaries between worlds. They had established a small trading post at the edge of the sanctuary, a place where Apache crafts could be sold at fair prices and where settlers could learn the truth about their neighbors. "The children are what give me hope," Nashota said, gesturing toward the valley where young Apache played freely, no longer hiding or fleeing. "They will grow up knowing both worlds, carrying forward what my grandmother preserved." A small school had been established in the settlement, where Nashota taught traditional ways alongside lessons in English and mathematics. Maxwell, drawing on his years as a scout, taught the older children to read the land and navigate by the stars, skills that belonged to no single culture but to all who called this harsh territory home. "Mary would be proud," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. This is what she wanted. Not just justice for what happened, but a future where it couldn't happen again. Nashota's hand found his, warm and certain. "And Tom? What would he think of his father now?" Maxwell had to swallow hard before answering. "I hope he'd understand that I finally stopped running, that I found a way to honor his memory by building something instead of hiding from it." The wooden building that served as their home and trading post was modest, but it held treasures beyond price. On one wall hung a framed copy of Griswold's newspaper article exposing Caldwell's crimes. On another, a carefully preserved Apache doll, the one that had carried Mary's letter across the years. Between them, a map of the sanctuary lands, marked with the growing settlements of returning Apache families. "Walsh sent word this morning," Maxwell said. "The commission has approved funds for a permanent agent to oversee relations with the settlement. Someone who understands both cultures," he said. "Someone the people trust." Nashota smiled. "And did you accept his offer?" "I told him we'd consider it, together." Maxwell looked out over the valley, then back to Nashota. "This is more than I ever thought I'd find again. Purpose. Community." He hesitated, then added softly, "Family." "Is that what we are becoming?" Nashota asked, her dark eyes steady on his. "Family? I think we already are," Maxwell replied. "Not by blood or by law, but by choice. By the path we've walked together." She nodded, understanding. "My grandmother would say that the strongest bonds are forged in fire, that we are tempered by our trials, made stronger than we were before." "Wise woman, your grandmother. As was your wife." Nashota's voice was gentle. "They guide us still, I think. Their truth lives on in what we build here." As they made their way down the path toward the settlement, Maxwell realized that the weight he had carried for 12 years had finally begun to lift. The ghost of Yellow Creek would always be with him, Mary, Tom, the innocents he couldn't save. But they no longer haunted him. Instead, they walked beside him, witnesses to the healing that had begun in this unlikely place. In the quiet of the desert evening, far from the isolated cabin where their journey had begun, Maxwell Sullivan and Nashota found what they had each been seeking without fully realizing it. Not just justice for the past, but hope for the future and the promise of healing for wounds too long left open to the desert air. Outside, the stars emerged over the sanctuary, the same stars that had witnessed the tragedy at Yellow Creek, the same stars that had guided them across the wilderness. But tonight, those ancient lights seemed to shine with new purpose, illuminating not just the darkness, but the path forward, a path they would continue to walk together.